Well, good afternoon. My name is Amy Johnson, and I am the director of the Brown County Historical Society. So when Mary Ellen Domeyer asked me if I wanted to be part of this workshop today, of course I said yes, because it involves two of my favorite things, history and theater. And then there's this stage. So this is my old junior high school. And this stage is what opened up the world of theater to me. It eventually brought me to the University of Minnesota, where I majored in theater. And then it brought me to London, where I worked at a fringe theater called the Southwark Playhouse. And one of my duties at the theater was to do flyer delivery. So if any of you guys have ever done flyer delivery, you'll know that it brings you to some interesting places. On my flyer delivery route, I went to a pirate prison, there was an apothecary museum, I walked past the childhood home of Charles Dickens, and then our neighbor, the Globe Theater. Because of this theater. And Shakespeare, if we all know anything, Shakespeare has a lot to say about his love of theaters. But anyways, for today's purposes, this is a light-hearted workshop. It is a prelude to a play that will be taking place this weekend, Much Ado About Nothing, where the setting has been brought from the 1500s to the 20th century. In fact, you are seeing the set in which the play will take place. It's a jazz club, not unlike the speakeasies or dance halls in our area in days gone by. And to tell us more about that, I would like to welcome local historian Dan Grebner. Please welcome Dan.
Thank you, Amy. So when you come to Much Ado About Nothing this weekend in this theater, you're going to see all kinds of young people falling in love. You're going to be treated to their emotions, all of their ups and downs, their romance, the excitement, oh, does he love me? Their jealousy. Why is she smiling at him? I love her. The denial. I'll never fall in love. Oh yeah? You'll also see features of secrecy. You'll see a masquerade ball. What better way for people to hide their identity? You'll see trickery. People trying to influence people's feelings about one another. And so, in thinking about preparing this play, the producers were thinking about what kind of setting to use. And they lit on the idea of the speakeasy. And it was the perfect selection. So what you see on the stage here, you see many of the physical features of a speakeasy. You see a bar with stools. You see a floor where people can dance. You see a stage with musicians on it. You see tables and chairs where people can sit down and relax and have something to eat. So what's a speakeasy? The idea of a speakeasy really got popular during Prohibition era in the United States from 1920 to 1933, when an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the 18th Amendment, made it illegal to produce, distribute, or sell intoxicating spirits. It was also illegal to export them or to import them. Well, a lot of people weren't very happy with that, and so there were entertainment industry people who found ways to make alcohol available illegally. And so the dictionary definition of speakeasy is an establishment that illegally sells alcohol. You'll find out from what I have to show you and what you'll see in the rest of the day and the play that a speakeasy is quite a bit more than just that. In New York and Chicago, there were maybe as many as 30,000 speakeasies during the Prohibition. The speakeasy, one of the most important parts of the speakeasy was secrecy. You didn't want to draw attention to yourself by law enforcement, either the local cops or the sheriff or the feds. The Bureau of Prohibition people were looking for people to put in jail for selling alcohol illegally. And so speakeasies were often out of town. They were hidden back in the woods. They were made on the exterior to look unattractive. And they didn't advertise. Their main means of advertising was by word of mouth. You never saw an article or an ad in the newspaper about a speakeasy or somebody who was selling alcohol illegally. So here in New Ulm, ballrooms really started to show up right after Prohibition. I can't find evidence that any ballrooms started during Prohibition. But the first 4 ballrooms to build up around New Ulm weren't downtown. They were across the river. 3 of them were across the Minnesota River, and 1 was across the Cottonwood River. The Blue Moon Ballroom was at what we call the Y, where Highway 15 and Highway 14 come together. And you remember where that CCC fountain was on Highway 14? Right across the road from that, between the highway and the river, was called the Black Dragon. And we know almost nothing about that, except that their wooden floor, their dance floor, has been preserved in somebody's home here in New Ulm. Out by the Portside Quarry, where there's a little housing development called Jeremy Drive, up on a tiny little hump of a hill there was what was called the Hilltop Ballroom. So those 3 were across the Minnesota River. Across the Cottonwood River was the Nightingale Club. And it was just across the bridge and a few hundred yards down and off to the right in the woods. So ballrooms, if you think from our perspective, we're so familiar with what a ballroom is. But what made them special in these days? Well, a ballroom, number 1, had to have a dance floor. It had to have a stage or a place large enough for at least 6 musicians. You had to be able to accommodate the 6-back Dutchman and larger bands. Okay? And it had to have high ceilings for good acoustics. It had to have booths for people to sit down, to relax, and have some refreshment. If you had a ballroom that was called a club, it usually meant in this area that it also had a kitchen or a restaurant that served meals. So for example, the Blue Moon Ballroom at the Y, when it picked up a kitchen and served meals, it was changed into the Valley Nightclub. Okay? And when the New Ulm Ballroom, which was in a building out by Kraft, changed into or had a kitchen and a restaurant, it became called the Colony Club. So something that was special about speakeasies was women. Think about before Prohibition. Where was the drinking done? It was done in bars. Who drank there? The men drank there. They bellied up to the bar. In a lot of places, women weren't welcome. Well, the owners of speakeasies wanted to make a profit, and they said, we've got to have women come to our businesses. And one of the things they did was this. They added tables. So the women didn't have to belly up to the bar. They didn't want to. They'd rather sit in a chair at the table. And once they had tables, it made sense to have food. And so that's when the kitchen started, and ballrooms started to become restaurants as well. They became popular places for dates. People met each other. They attracted people for wedding anniversaries and weddings as well. One of the most fun things I've discovered in interviews of people, there are reminiscences about ballrooms, is people who said, I met my husband in a ballroom. I met my wife at George's. So hop in the car with me, and we're going to go right out here to Center Street. We're going to drive towards the hill. We're going to go up the hill past Herman, past the college. We're going to keep on going down Camel's Back. We're going to see the Cottonwood River Bridge. And we've just, on this picture, driven across the Cottonwood River Bridge. Okay? We're looking towards the hill that goes up towards Hanscott. If you count 1, 2, 3, 4 driveways on the right, fourth driveway, today it's a private home, so don't go there. But that was where the Nightingale nightclub was. And somebody described it as way back in the woods, so it's out of sight. And there's only one photograph we know of the Nightingale Club. Here it is. Doesn't look very attractive, does it? It wasn't meant to be attractive from the outside. You can see, just beside the car here, you can see this is the main entrance, a little step up. Okay, this is actually a house. The bar was just inside that main entrance. This was the host, Jesse Becker. Grew up on this property, became a baseball player, became a farmer, raised fur-bearing animals for sale, and became a restaurant nightclub owner, and became a politician. This photograph is from his campaign card when he ran for governor of Minnesota in the primary election in 1940. The guy who beat him had 23,000 votes to his 2,000 votes. So this is a drawing of the inside of the Nightingale nightclub. It was drawn by Arlen Schmidt. Arlen Schmidt was, after he graduated from high school in the early 1950s, hired by Don Weigel, restaurant owner who owned this property. It had the now defunct Nightingale Club on it, and Arlen and another individual were hired to dismantle it and to salvage the building materials for construction of the new project. And here you see this, I imagine that this whole space is probably about as big as the seating space in this auditorium. But up here you see the stage. It was a large stage. You see booths on both sides. There are 2 rows of booths here. This is the entrance that you saw in the photograph. Here are some tables. This is the bar. This is a ramp that rolls up into the ballroom. Over here is the kitchen. This contraption up here somehow brought well water up to the window so that it could be used in the kitchen. There are some secret parts of this building. There's a stairway here and a stairway here. One of them goes downstairs to the men's dressing room. One goes downstairs to the women's dressing room. And somewhere there was an escape door that you could run out and go down to the river and run away in case somebody was looking for you that you didn't want to have find you. And people who remember this say it was beautiful inside. This is one of those shiny mirrored globes that they shine the light on and it will rotate and sparkle and add to the atmosphere of the ballroom. So this was the Nightingale Club. Perfect atmosphere, don't you think, for the setting, for Much Ado About Nothing? Music, dancing, romantic beauty, and secrecy. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about ballrooms before you leave today, there's a display, a traveling exhibit from the Brown County Historical Society that shows you many of the ballrooms of Brown County. I want to thank Brown County Historical Society, in particular State Street Theater, for supporting this program.
Thank you, Dan. So our next speaker is Larry Zare. He is a professor of English at Martin Luther College. While his classroom approach to teaching the subject of Shakespeare or escorting his students to England might delve much deeper than the subject that we are covering today, for the purpose of this workshop is to keep things light. So please welcome Larry Zare and Shakespeare Lite.
When they asked me to keep it light, I realized that no tests were to be given or no recitations required of famous Shakespeare quotes. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting is as you study Shakespeare, you find out that he was a man of the people, and he had a good instinct for what the people liked. So I've done a couple of things to give you an idea of what the entertainment industry was like during the time of Shakespeare. First, Elizabethan entertainment. All forms of entertainment took place on the south bank of the Thames River in Southwark, as Amy pointed out, which was outside the purview of central London and the purview of the Puritan Lord Mayor of London, who didn't like plays or entertainment. There were other forms of entertainment going on in the South Bank. One was cockfighting, which included a lot of gambling. Another one was bear baiting, which used dogs, also included a lot of gambling. There were other forms of unmentionable recreations in the south side of the Thames as well. And so the theater, when the theaters arrived in the South Bank, they become kind of a safe form of entertainment to that point. This is an early recreation of the Globe Theater as it sat on the bank of the Thames River. This was the theater itself, was originally called the Theater. And what had happened, it was located in the city of the suburb of Shoreditch, not far from Jack the Ripper's territory, by the way. And in 1597 and 1598, the acting company dismantled the theater over the Christmas holiday because the owner of the land was on a vacation in Paris. And so the acting troupe dismantled the property and rebuilt the Globe on the south side of the Thames River. Much like many of our recreational vehicle lands, the owner owned the land, but you rented the facility and you owned your own mobile home or your own RV. That was kind of the same arrangement that they had there as well. And so they rebuilt the Globe on that side of the river. The Globe itself had 4 areas, and I'll show you a picture of this in the middle. The pit, as we call it, was right in front of the stage, and there was no seats. There was standing room only. That was, of course, the cheapest you could pay, was a penny each. Now, you have to understand, the theater season in London is not quite like Minnesota, okay? It rains a lot in London. So an open-air theater becomes problematic for people called the groundlings who are standing in the wet. The galleries were more expensive, and they were more like glorified wooden bleachers, which were along the sides. And then the gentlemen's rooms were up above the level, were more like you could rent little banquet halls, if you will, very tiny. They were 4 pence, and they came with a cushion. And then the Lord's room were 5 pence, and that was also included with a cushion. Now, when we attended the new reconstructed Globe in its inaugural season, 1997, we could rent a cushion for our extra fee, and it wasn't anywhere near 1 pence or 4 pence to get in. This is a kind of a cutaway of what the Globe kind of looks like. And I have a little bit better picture here that you can kind of get an idea, but that gives you a little bit of a model looking how it breaks out. The wooden O is the shape of a wooden O, and it's about 100-foot diameter across. So similar in size to the Nightingale, dance floor length anyway. It was octagonal and had an open air stage. During Shakespeare's era, it could seat between 2,000 to 3,000 people. Today it seats about 1,500. We're a little bit bigger than we were in the Elizabethan time. The stage was between 30 to 43 feet wide and between 15 to 27 feet deep, and it stood between 3 and 5 feet high, about what this is like here on our stage. It was approximately 30 feet from the front of the stage to the first row of the gallery, only 30 feet. You'll see a picture here in just a moment. That's the reconstructed globe on the south side of the Thames River. This is an angle that about from our seat, the first time we attended the Globe in its inaugural season. That's the angle we had at the stage right before the production. The students didn't like some of the obstructed views, so they just went and stood in the pit for the whole production. This gives you an idea of what the stage looks like. You see the galleries off on the left and behind. So from that front gallery to the front of the stage is only about 30 feet. Okay. So if you'll notice this picture, we had a tour of the globe, and before the production, and we were sitting up there as we were talking. There was some quiet at that time, and they were rehearsing a number on stage, and the acting troupe, they were working on a dance number. We could hear every word they said to each other, including all the expletives from where we were sitting up in that loft without any microphones. They didn't need these back then. The acoustics are incredible in the Globe. I don't know why, I can't tell you why. The only problem we had with the acoustics was the air traffic. Helicopters and airplanes would often get in the way of the sound. Okay, with that in mind, Shakespeare repeats himself a lot. In many of his plays, if you've read a number of his plays from your school days, you'll recall that he does a lot of repeating themes. The one that is important here is the love and courtship and marriage theme, which are included in many of his romantic comedies. Also, parents and children and their relationships. There's some father-daughter things going on here. A little contrast. Not quite the level of some other plays, but it's there. Contrasting worlds. Shakespeare was really good about pointing out the differences between people and their society. For example, he liked going from court to country. He would have a bunch of courtiers, and then he'd jump into the country and talk with those yokels. And he'd use that dialect difference for humorous effect. Appearance versus reality. What you see isn't necessarily what you get with Shakespeare. There's a lot of masking and disguises going on in his plays. In Much Ado About Nothing, there's a lot of that whole masquerade ball is there for a reason, because it's a mistaken identity that gets played out. And so that becomes a part of many of his plays. And not so much in the comedies, but in other of his plays, power, who controls it, who wants it, the rise of one at the expense of the other, then revenge. But one of the ones that is common in almost all of his plays is his plays begin in a bit of disorder. And in order for the play to end satisfactorily, it has to yield to order ultimately by the end of the play. So if you are familiar with Hamlet, the scene begins where the person, the night watch, have seen the ghost of recently dead King Hamlet. Well, that's a bit of disorder. That's unrest. When the spirit world starts to stir, that's a sign that the world is in a sense of disorder. And in order for the disorder to be set, things must be set right. And of course, that's why Hamlet says, "Oh, cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right." So he has to set it right. And the same thing holds true in many of these other plays. The beginning of Much Ado About Nothing, the soldiers are arriving at Leonato's, coming back being involved in a war. And so that's a sense of disorder. Forgiveness or redemption is very common, and that is also a theme in this play as well. And then, not so much in this one, but death is the expiration of the unknown. There is a pseudo-death in this one, which poses some problems. The acting company, which was started by Richard Burbage, began as the Lord Chamberlain's men under Queen Elizabeth. And then when James came in under reign, they became the King's men. So they were under royal patronage. So they were probably the top dogs as an acting troupe in London. When they had the Queen as your patron and the King as your patron, they were probably considered the best acting troupe around. All actors were male. It was considered inappropriate for women to be on stage. This meant that younger actors would be forced to portray female characters. I guess they couldn't do Shakespeare in Florida now. The actors would buy shares in the company, corporate shares. So by the end of his career, William Shakespeare was quite a wealthy man. In fact, he retired, built a nice new house in London, which he called the New Place, which later burned, unfortunately. But that's where he made his money, was from the share of the acting troupe. Much ado about nothing. If we did this, we might call this romance disrupted, but love triumphs. Ultimately. The title has been problematic over the years. Whether Much Ado About Nothing is stress over simple things, or, in other words, love, or eavesdropping, which was called noting in Elizabethan era. So if you're eavesdropped, you're noting, so nothing and noting. And then, of course, there's the sexual pun on nothing, which was a description of how men and women were different physically. We'll leave it at that. So Much Ado About Nothing. Some might suggest this has a happier outcome than Romeo and Juliet. If you are familiar with Romeo and Juliet, you will recognize similar themes and similar occurrences. For example, you have a meddlesome priest who decides to play dead, that the lover should play dead and act dead in order to move the plot along. Same thing happens in Romeo and Juliet, but not for a good outcome. Is it a better outcome than Taming of the Shrew? In Taming of the Shrew, Kate and Petruchio are constantly bickering, constantly arguing, and Petruchio has to tame her, which is a whole other angle. But Benedict and Beatrice are very similar in their regaling each other, heaping insults upon each other, constantly in public, in front of others, in court. And so they suggest that there's a better outcome in that because they actually do finally respond to some kind of romantic relationship. And then there's, of course, the hint towards Iago's in Othello. Don John, Don Pedro's half-bastard brother, is the cause of all the trouble here in this play. And so he becomes an early version of Iago from Shakespeare's Othello. Some have suggested that this could be a commentary on wooing practices of the time. Beatrice and Benedict woo in prose, which is probably why they're more common, more favored, more favorite. People like them better because they're easier to understand each other because they're wooing in prose, whereas Claudio and Hero tend to woo in verse. It's kind of an interesting thing. Play is also known for its wit and humor, especially the use of malapropisms by the Dogberry and the Watch. They mount a watch with the local yokels, and Dogberry has an inflated sense of self-importance, and he tries to impress Leonato with his use of language, and he winds up, of course, insulting him quite often. But the humorous effect of Dogberry and the Watch are really worth paying attention to. I've seen several versions of Much Ado About Nothing, but three stick out for me. The first that I saw was American Players Theater down in Spring Green, Wisconsin. They did a rendition. I took a bunch of students down there. They did a 1880s Wild West version of Much Ado About Nothing. And I was a little concerned. I don't normally like out of time, out of date Shakespeare, but they did a really good job of it in this case. In fact, I remember one of the students that I took along on the trip came up to me on the aisle. She said, "Professor Zare, you were right. This really is funny." After we had studied it in class, I said, "This is really funny stuff." And they weren't laughing, you know. And when they saw it on stage, it was, "This is really funny." And then we got a chance to see the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford did Much Ado About Nothing, and I was a little concerned because this is 1997, and Kenneth Branagh came out with a very fine movie in the early 90s, Much Ado, and I thought, how are they going to replace that? How are they going to, you know, it's such a movie generation. But the Royal Shakespeare Acting Company is tremendous, and the kids, the students, liked it more than the movie, the actual production of the play itself. They did a great scene of the eavesdropping using a table that was an angled table that was just marvelous staging on their part. And then, of course, I would recommend the Branagh version of the movie Much Ado About Nothing, which stars a lot of American actors. Ironically enough, in an interview Kenneth Branagh had about the movie, he said he wanted to cast distinctly American actors because British actors have a tendency to clip their language and clip their accents, so it makes it very difficult to understand. He says American actors represent more of the original Shakespeare dialect than modern British actors because of the rounded vowels. And so he was very particular about that. So I would recommend you 3 versions you can maybe see. With that, we're back to Amy.
All right, so minstrels. Minstrels were often a part of Shakespeare's plays, and Much Ado About Nothing also has a minstrel named Balthazar. What we are going to do now is we are going to listen to the Balthazar Band. This show has an entire band called the Balthazar Band. So with this, I'll give you the Balthazar Band.
She said entire band. So this is just a preview. This is just a preview. So to get the full experience, you have to come this weekend. Tickets will be for sale after Shakespeare Lite, but yeah, we didn't want to give you the full thing because then you wouldn't have to come. Like this is the pinnacle of the show. So we'll see what we can do. The whole thing. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Summer first was levy, then sign October.
it working? Okay. Thank you so much. Weren't they outstanding? I was going to say the theme of the day is light. So truly, this is the Balthazar Band Lite. So like Michael said, if you want to get the full effect, we're adding stand-up bass player, a piano, another saxophone,
Better singer?
a trombone.
Oh.
So truly, they did a great job, but if you want the full experience, make sure you come this weekend. So my name is Christina Kester, and this is my husband, Michael, and this is little Willa, our littlest cast member, and we are the directors of Much Ado About Nothing.
Well, we figured we'd introduce Willow first because when we were first approached to do this show, she was 8 months pregnant. So we're like, why not?
Hey, naughty, naughty.
Hey, naughty, naughty. Let's. So we had we co-directed and we had a lot of help within the cast. A lot of people that had prior directing experience and some that had no prior directing experience, but really helped give ideas. And when we couldn't be there because we had to, play babysitter and try and manage our own. This is number 4, by the way. So we have 3 others at home. They all stepped up, so I did want to take this opportunity to thank our wonderful cast, which you'll see, all of you will see this weekend, because it really was a group effort. It wasn't just us telling them what to do and they were following orders. They had wonderful ideas, and so from start to finish, the product that you will see this weekend is completely a group effort.
And it is something we're really, really excited about and proud about, and we'll have to talk to Professor Zaire afterwards and see if he can add our production to that list. It is set in the late 1940s. Costumes, scenery, all the music will be from that time period. So kind of a fresh new take on a wonderful classic. So we'll check with Larry, which will be interesting because Larry was actually Michael's professor in college, his Shakespeare professor.
And I did not like Shakespeare.
Hope to do him justice, but please do come see the production. It's going to be very funny, we promise you. Shakespeare will be very funny, just like Larry said when his students saw it on stage. Tickets are for sale today, so if you want to grab those, you can just visit the will call window on your way out and get those. And lastly, I just want to take this time to thank all of our co-presenters for this presentation. Of course, State Street Theater, Mary Ellen Domeyer and Lisa Wall with State Street did a lot of the legwork to put this program together. We need to thank Amy Johnson and Dr. Grebner from the Brown County Historical Society. And like Dan mentioned, if you want to learn a little bit more, there is a presentation or a display board out in the hallway talking more about the history of ballrooms in Brown County, of course tying to our production, which is set in a 1940s ballroom club. And then lastly...
And if you want to learn more about Shakespeare, can they audit a course or something? I'll take it again.
So of course we want to thank Martin Luther College and Dr. Larry Zaire for being here and presenting Shakespeare Lite. And with that, I think that's the end. Amy, do you have any closing remarks? Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. The play opens this Friday, 7 p.m., performance on Saturday at 7 p.m. as well, and then lastly Sunday at 2 p.m. So we hope you will join us.
Make sure to grab tickets on your way out. Oh.